Do you think time heals all wounds, or some never close?
Picture this moment unfolding in vivid detail as if it were etched into my memory forever. 2 weeks before my little sister's dream wedding, when my dad suddenly corners me over the phone with his voice carrying that familiar gravelly tone of unyielding authority that always made my stomach twist in knots, declaring without a hint of hesitation or remorse that if I even considered skipping Lisa's big day, he would immediately pull the plug on my tuition payments, leaving me high and dry without any further handouts from the family coffers, a threat that landed like a punch to the gut because what he could not possibly have known at that precise juncture, what nobody in my tightly knit yet deeply dysfunctional family had the foggiest idea about, was that I had already graduated at the very top of my class 6 months earlier with honors that would make any parent beam with pride, and that I had secured a six-figure job offer in the competitive world of tech sales right here in the bustling heart of Silicon Valley, achievements I had deliberately kept shrouded in secrecy, like a carefully guarded treasure waiting for the perfect moment to unleash their full impact. Yet instead of firing back with the triumphant truth that could have shattered his assumptions into a million pieces, I chose to let the heavy silence stretch out between us like a taut wire ready to snap, while my mind raced ahead, envisioning all the intricate ways this escalating family drama could explode into something far more consequential than anyone might have anticipated. And indeed it did erupt spectacularly just minutes before the ceremony itself, when I finally slipped that innocuous-looking envelope into his trembling hands and watched as his world tilted on its axis, nearly causing him to drop it right there amid the solemn vows and the gathered guests who had no clue about the storm brewing beneath the surface of our polished family facade. I can still vividly recall the exact instant when my dad unleashed that bombshell of an ultimatum upon me, as though it were replaying in slow motion even now after all these weeks have passed since that fateful call. Finding myself at that time holed up in my modestly sized apartment in San Francisco, surrounded by a chaotic sea of half-unpacked boxes that served as constant reminders of the fresh start I was building, far away from the suffocating expectations of my Ohio roots, when my phone suddenly came alive with his name flashing across the screen like an unwelcome harbinger of conflict, because Richard Harper never bothered with casual chit-chat during his calls, but instead always delivered his pronouncements with the weight of a judge's gavel, launching straight into the heart of the matter by growling that Lisa's wedding represented the pinnacle event for our entire family, and that any notion on my part of skipping it would result in him revoking my tuition support without a second thought or any room for negotiation. A declaration that pierced deeper than the surface threat itself, because the word handouts dripped with such condescension, considering how I had spent years clawing my way through financial hardships, relying on hard-won scholarships and endless strings of part-time jobs to fund my education, while he lavished every available resource on Lisa's so-called bright future, painting her as the undisputed golden child who received all the preferential treatment I had been systematically denied throughout our shared upbringing. Rather than erupting into the argument that bubbled just beneath my composed exterior, I opted to respond with a measured calm that I had honed to perfection during high-stakes negotiations at my new workplace, where closing multi-million-dollar deals required unflappable poise under pressure, simply acknowledging his demand with a simple yet deliberate "Okay, Dad, I'll be there," that masked the whirlwind of emotions churning inside me as I ended the call and allowed a wry laugh to escape my lips at the sheer absurdity of his outdated leverage, because in reality I had orchestrated my academic triumph at Stanford's rigorous MBA program, finishing not just at the top, but with summa cum laude distinctions that opened doors to opportunities my family could scarcely imagine. And that coveted job position not only promised a starting salary well into six figures, but also included flexible remote work arrangements that empowered me to craft a life entirely on my own uncompromised terms, without needing to lean on the strings he thought he still held so tightly in his grasp. Yet revealing these monumental successes prematurely would have robbed me of the delicious anticipation I had been cultivating like a master strategist, plotting the downfall of an overconfident opponent, so I resolved to bide my time, savoring the irony of their impending shock when the full truth came cascading out in a torrent they could neither ignore nor undo. In the days that immediately followed that tense exchange, the onslaught of wedding-related communications from Lisa flooded my inbox with effusive details about her excitement and subtle reminders of the event's grandeur, including her gushing announcement that she could hardly wait for me to meet her fiancé Mark, who happened to be a rising lawyer in a prestigious firm, a fact she emphasized repeatedly as if to underscore the perfection of her path in contrast to my own more circuitous journey, a dynamic that echoed the imbalances of our childhood in that sprawling suburban home in Ohio, where Lisa reigned as the adored princess, showered with dance lessons, designer clothes, and unwavering parental affirmation, while I emerged as the resilient tomboy Morat, home tinkering with engines in the garage or devouring books on entrepreneurship, then conforming to the scripted expectations Dad imposed with his iron-fisted pronouncements about what constituted a proper daughter's trajectory, often dismissing my ambitions as mere flights of fancy by labeling me too independent for my own good, a euphemism that thinly veiled his frustration at my refusal to follow the neatly laid-out blueprint he had envisioned for both of us, especially after Mom's untimely passing left him to navigate single parenthood through a lens of rigid control and unspoken grief that manifested in favoritism rather than fairness. Determined to inject a spark of playful defiance into the proceedings without derailing my larger plan, I crafted an RSVP response that blended enthusiasm with a dash of cryptic wit, declaring my thrilled commitment to attend while cheekily noting that I would be bringing my +1 named Success, in hopes that it met with their approval, a message that elicited a barrage of bewildered emojis from Lisa in reply, allowing me to visualize her furrowed brow and fleeting irritation at the ambiguity, which served as my inaugural act of subtle retribution, a light-hearted prod that hinted at the upheavals to come without exposing my hand too soon. Yet, as the calendar inexorably marched toward the wedding date, an undercurrent of uncertainty began to erode my initial resolve, prompting me to question whether subjecting myself to this theatrical family spectacle merely to orchestrate a personal vindication was truly worth the emotional toll, or if perhaps there lingered some deeper thread of loyalty that might compel me to soften my approach and seek reconciliation instead of confrontation. The pivotal turning point arrived on the eve of my flight booking when another call pierced the quiet of my evening, this time from my soon-to-be boss, whose enthusiastic confirmation of the employment offer carried an undercurrent of promise about the expansive opportunities awaiting me in the role, underscoring just how monumental this transition truly was. And in that instant, as I absorbed her words, a surge of clarity washed over me, transforming the impending wedding from a dreaded obligation into a strategic arena where I could decisively rewrite the narrative of our family dynamics on terms that finally honored my own hard-fought victories. However, as I methodically began assembling the contents of that fateful plain white envelope devoid of any external markings, my pulse quickened with a blend of exhilaration and apprehension, wondering if the pursuit of such pointed retribution might ultimately yield a flavor more bittersweet than the sweet justice I had so meticulously envisioned, leaving the outcome shrouded in the tantalizing veil of what-ifs that promised to keep everyone, including myself, perpetually on edge until the final revelation unfolded. Touching down in Cleveland after that long flight from the West Coast felt like plunging straight into a time capsule of my past, where the crisp autumn air carried hints of lake breezes and the inescapable weight of family expectations that had always seemed to press down harder on me than on anyone else, especially as Dad maneuvered his impeccably maintained SUV through the familiar suburbs toward the house that held so many layers of unresolved tensions and whispered resentments accumulated over years of uneven affections and unspoken competitions between siblings. His brief comment about how I appeared different catching me off guard as he glanced sideways at my professional attire that subtly signaled the independence I had forged far from his oversight, yet prompting only a non-committal grunt from him before he pivoted seamlessly to dissecting the wedding schedule with military precision, outlining rehearsal dinners, floral arrangements, and seating charts, as if the entire event hinged on his unyielding orchestration, leaving little room for the personal undercurrents that simmered just below the surface of our interactions. That evening's family dinner unfolded in the warmly lit dining room of our old home, now transformed with fresh linens and centerpieces that screamed Lisa's influence, from the crystal glassware down to the menu of herb-roasted beef accompanied by an array of sides that catered to every palate imaginable. a gathering that swelled with the arrival of aunts, uncles, and Mark's impeccably groomed parents, all abuzz with anecdotes about the venue's scenic overlooks and the string quartet booked for the reception, creating an atmosphere thick with anticipatory excitement yet laced with the undercurrents of judgment that always seemed to swirl whenever my own life came under scrutiny, amid the clinking of silverware and the flow of moderately priced wines that loosened tongues just enough to reveal hidden barbs. Lisa made her grand entrance fashionably late, as was her custom, sweeping into the room in a form-fitting designer ensemble that accentuated her bridal glow and immediately drawing everyone into her orbit with hugs and effusive greetings that positioned her at the center of attention, while she pulled me into an embrace that felt more performative than genuine, her words of gratitude for my presence mingling with a casual mention of Dad's earlier worries about my potential absence, which carried an undertone of sibling rivalry that echoed our lifelong dynamic, where she effortlessly claimed the spotlight and I navigated the shadows of comparison. As the meal progressed and conversations meandered from wedding trivia to more probing inquiries about individual paths, the spotlight inevitably shifted toward me when Uncle Ted, leaning back with a glass in hand and a tipsy glint in his eye, posed the question about whether I was still mired in the supposed drudgery of graduate school, a query that invited the usual round of sympathetic nods and assumptions about my ongoing struggles, prompting me to seize the moment not with a full disclosure of my triumphs, but with a cleverly laced response that acknowledged the grind while injecting a humorous twist by remarking that at least my efforts spared the family from footing the bill for someone else's elaborate path to marital bliss, a statement that hung in the air for a suspended second before eliciting a wave of laughter across the table, including a reluctant chuckle from Dad, whose narrowed eyes betrayed a flicker of irritation at the implied critique, yet allowed my words to serve as that satisfying nugget of revenge wrapped in wit that diffused tension without igniting outright conflict, leaving everyone to ponder the layers beneath my light-hearted deflection. Seeking a momentary escape from the intensifying scrutiny, I excused myself to the porch, where the cool night air offered a brief respite, only to inadvertently position myself within earshot of Lisa's hushed phone conversation drifting from the adjacent kitchen, her voice pitched low as she assured Mark that they needed to expedite the transfer of certain funds before the ceremony, with Dad covering the remaining balance, but emphasizing the critical need to keep any details from me, particularly regarding the adjustments to the trust fund, a revelation that sent a jolt through me as I pieced together the implications of her words, recalling vague assurances from years past that the family inheritance had dwindled to nothing after Mom's passing, yet now suspecting a deliberate redirection of resources toward Lisa's pursuits, from her education to her current extravagances, including this wedding that drained what should have been a shared legacy, turning what I had dismissed as mere favoritism into something far more calculated and personal, like an outright betrayal orchestrated under the guise of parental protection. Overwhelmed by the surge of anger that threatened to propel me inside for an immediate confrontation, I instead held my ground, absorbing the fragments of her dialogue that painted a picture of complicity between her and Dad in maneuvering finances to her advantage, while I had bootstrapped my way forward, oblivious to the strings being pulled behind the scenes, a discovery that transformed my quiet attendance into a calculated presence aimed at unraveling the very foundations of their assumptions about my dependence. Resisting the urge to storm back and demand explanations that would prematurely shatter the fragile peace, I re-entered the fray with a disarming quip about the dessert's suspiciously artificial flavor, which drew easy smiles and shifted the focus away from me, allowing the evening to wind down under the veil of normalcy, even as my thoughts churned with strategies for the days ahead, particularly when Dad later drew me into a private sidebar, his expression stern and unyielding as he warned against any disruptions to Lisa's spotlight, reiterating the tuition threat as a final reminder of his leverage in the family hierarchy, a ploy that might have cowed me in the past, but now only fueled my resolve to let him cling to his illusions, while the envelope in my luggage gathered the evidence of my autonomy, like a ticking clock counting down to exposure. Retiring to my childhood bedroom that night with its faded posters and lingering sense of familiarity, I stared at the ceiling as a notification from work illuminated my phone, confirming the finalization of my contract with all its promising implications. Yet, as the pieces of Lisa's overheard scheme coalesced in my mind, I couldn't shake the nagging question of whether her machinations extended beyond mere funds into something that entangled Dad more deeply than I had ever imagined, leaving me to wonder if the revelations I planned would heal old wounds or simply tear open new ones in ways none of us could predict. The bridal shower arrived the following afternoon like an inevitable wave crashing over the remnants of last night's revelations, carrying with it the pastel hues of forced femininity and the cloying sweetness of mimosas that masked the underlying tensions. Bubbling just beneath the surface of polite chatter and gift-wrapping extravagance, all set against the picturesque backdrop of Aunt Karen's sprawling lakeside property, where manicured lawns sloped gently toward the shimmering water, creating an illusion of serene domestic bliss that contrasted sharply with the storm of suspicions now raging in my mind after overhearing Lisa's secretive phone call about the trust fund maneuvers, prompting me to navigate this gathering not as a mere participant, but as a wary observer attuned to every subtle shift in alliances and unspoken agendas that could either solidify my resolve for retribution or tempt me toward an unforeseen path of forgiveness, amid the flurry of ribbons and laughter echoing through the sun-dappled rooms. Karen had outdone herself with the setup, transforming her sunroom into a shrine of bridal excess, complete with tiered trays of finger sandwiches, delicate pastries, and a towering cake adorned with fresh blooms that symbolized Lisa's impending union. Yet as I arrived fashionably on time for once, slipping into a simple sundress that felt out of place among the more elaborate outfits, I couldn't shake the sense of being an intruder in this celebration of my sister's ascent, while my own hidden victories remained tucked away like loaded dice, waiting for the roll that would change everything, forcing me to question whether my decision to withhold the truth stemmed from strategic brilliance or a deeper pettiness that even I struggled to justify. Lisa dominated the space from the moment I stepped inside, her radiant smile drawing compliments like magnets as she perched on a wicker throne, accepting envelopes and packages with gracious thanks that highlighted her effortless charm, while relatives fussed over her with stories of their own weddings and advice laced with nostalgia, prompting Karen to pull me aside early on with her trademark blend of concern and curiosity, inquiring about my prospects for romance in that probing way aunts often do, as if my single status at nearly 30 represented some personal failing rather than a deliberate choice to prioritize career over convention, leading me to deflect with a lighthearted quip about being too occupied constructing my own empire to chase after fleeting heartstrings, a response that elicited her knowing nod yet left me inwardly seething at the implication that my path paled in comparison to Lisa's neatly packaged future, especially when she followed up by sighing that I simply couldn't allow my sister to outpace me entirely in the matrimonial race, a comment that struck a raw nerve, reminding me of the years spent in her shadow, where every achievement of mine was diminished by the glow of Lisa's privileges, now amplified by this event's opulent trappings, funded in part by the very resources I had been led to believe were long depleted. As the afternoon wore on with games and toasts that glorified the institution of marriage in increasingly saccharine tones, I found myself increasingly restless, prompting Lisa to draw me into a sidebar embrace, where her whispered appreciation for my attendance carried a sincerity that warred with the duplicity I now suspected her of, weaving her arm through mine as we mingled, yet her casual mention of how relieved Dad felt at my compliance only fueled the fire of resentment simmering within me, transforming what might have been a sisterly moment into an opportunity for my next calculated act of subversion. When the group transitioned to the traditional advice-sharing activity, I volunteered to moderate, suggesting an innovative twist that incorporated humorous anecdotes about marital pitfalls drawn from real-life observations, which allowed me to steer the conversation toward themes of financial transparency and the pitfalls of hidden expectations, delivering my contribution with a sly remark about how the best unions thrive on equal footing without one partner secretly redirecting the shared resources to their own whims, a veiled illusion that landed with a ripple of uneasy laughter across the room, causing Lisa's expression to falter ever so slightly as the implication hung in the air like an uninvited guest, providing that witty satisfaction of revenge doled out in measured doses that pricked without drawing overt blood, yet left everyone subtly unsettled and me with a fleeting thrill of empowerment tempered by the nagging awareness that such barbs might be eroding the fragile bonds I claimed to value. Desperate for a breather from the escalating artificiality, I wandered into Karen's private study under the pretense of locating a forgotten charger. The room's cluttered shelves and antique desk, exuding a musty aura of preserved family history that drew me inexorably toward the drawers where curiosity overrode caution, leading to the discovery of a bundled stack of aged correspondence, including letters I had penned during my college years pleading for tuition assistance that Dad had summarily dismissed, alongside a dog-eared bank statement revealing a series of transfers from the family trust explicitly rerouted to bolster Lisa's endeavors from her undergraduate tuition to extracurricular pursuits, and now evidently extending to the wedding's lavish scale, with a marginal note in Dad's handwriting justifying the shifts as necessary for her emotional stability in the wake of Mom's loss, a rationale that rang hollow against the backdrop of my solitary struggles subsisting on instant noodles and overnight shifts to avoid debt while she floated through life on a cushion of unearned support, turning the favoritism I had long accepted as parental bias into irrefutable evidence of systematic embezzlement that shook me to my core as I furtively photographed the documents, my hands trembling with a cocktail of fury and betrayal that begged the question of whether to charge back into the party brandishing this proof and dismantle the facade on the spot, or to fold it into my arsenal for the climactic confrontation. Still days away, a dilemma that highlighted the questionable morality of my prolonged silence, which prolonged the pain for all involved, including myself, making me wonder if viewers peering into this narrative would condemn my vengeful restraint as needlessly cruel rather than cleverly cathartic. Emerging from the study with the weight of those findings pressing on my conscience, I rejoined the festivities, masking my turmoil behind smiles and small talk, yet the internal conflict raged on as the shower drew to a close, with Lisa enveloped in hugs and well wishes that I contributed to superficially, while my mind plotted the integration of this new ammunition into the envelope's contents, envisioning a more devastating impact that would force reckonings long overdue. But as evening fell and Dad summoned me to the garage for what he termed a necessary heart-to-heart, his face etched with uncharacteristic vulnerability as he reiterated the tuition ultimatum, now laced with pleas for harmony to preserve Lisa's joy, a direct escalation that pinned me between the urge to shatter his composure with the truth and the strategic patience I had clung to thus far, his eyes searching mine for compliance that I feigned with a nod and a promise of good behavior, even as the documents burned in my pocket, leaving me to grapple with the precipice of revelation and the haunting uncertainty of whether igniting this fuse prematurely would salvage our fractured ties or incinerate them beyond recognition in the final hours before the ceremony's irreversible tide. The morning of the wedding broke with a humid haze clinging to the air like an uninvited veil over the country club's manicured grounds, where crews of florists and coordinators darted about, finalizing every detail, from the archway draped in cascading white roses to the aisles lined with chairs adorned in silk sashes, all contributing to the meticulously crafted spectacle that Lisa had dreamed of since girlhood. Yet, as I maneuvered through the pre-ceremony bustle in my assigned role as maid of honor, the lavender chiffon gown scratching against my skin like a constant reminder of my reluctant participation, I couldn't help but reflect on the garage confrontation from the previous evening, where Dad's stern warnings had circled back to the tuition leverage, now infused with a desperate edge that hinted at his awareness of the shifting sands beneath his control, prompting me to weigh the merits of accelerating my plan versus letting the tension build to its natural crescendo amid the growing chorus of relatives arriving with their polished facades and probing questions that threatened to unravel the composure I had so carefully maintained throughout this fraught homecoming. Slipping into the bridal suite early to avoid the full onslaught of preparations, I found Lisa surrounded by her closest confidants, applying last touches to her makeup and adjusting the intricate beading on her gown, her excitement palpable yet undercut by the occasional furtive glance toward her phone, as if expecting confirmation of some critical transaction that tied directly into the financial whispers I had overheard days earlier, leading me to engage her in light conversation about the day's logistics, while inwardly cataloging the signs of strain around her eyes that suggested the weight of secrets pressing down even on the golden child, a dynamic that humanized her just enough to stir a flicker of reluctant empathy within me, complicating my resolve to proceed with the retribution I had mapped out so meticulously. As the hours ticked toward the ceremony, the rehearsal dinner from the night before lingered in my thoughts, having unfolded, with a veneer of harmony shattered only by the toasts that danced on the edge of revelation where Dad's earnest salute to family unity provided the perfect foil for my counterpoint about the unexpected twists life throws when one realizes the true distribution of power within the household, a remark delivered with a disarming smile that elicited chuckles from the guests. While Dad's jaw tightened in silent rebuke, allowing me to extract that layer of witty satisfaction from exposing the hypocrisies without naming them outright, yet planting seeds of doubt that rippled through conversations long after the plates had cleared, a subtle revenge that amplified the undercurrents of uncertainty swirling around the event and drawing sideways glances from relatives who sensed the fractures in our united front without grasping their full depth. Mingling among the arriving guests. In the foyer, I fielded the inevitable inquiries about my own life with evasive charm, deflecting comments on my apparent glow of success by attributing it to the thrill of impending career advancements that stopped just short of full disclosure, keeping the intrigue alive as an old family acquaintance pulled me aside for a confidential chat, her curiosity piqued by my poised demeanor, leading to an exchange where I hinted at life-altering news on the horizon without specifics, a choice that isolated me further in my strategy, even as it invited speculation that might have fostered alliances if I had chosen transparency instead, a decision that would likely strike observers as unnecessarily provocative, stirring unnecessary drama when directness could have diffused tensions earlier, yet serving my purpose of heightening the impending climax by maintaining the veil of mystery around my true standing. The afternoon brought an unexpected pivot when Aunt Karen intercepted me in a quiet hallway, her cheeks flushed from a preemptive glass of champagne and her voice lowered to a conspiratorial hush as she confessed to having noticed my intrusion into her study the day prior, acknowledging the gravity of the documents I had uncovered and revealing her own conflicted knowledge of Dad's trust manipulations intended to safeguard Lisa's future at the expense of equity, a disclosure that positioned her as an unlikely ally, urging me to temper my response for the sake of the day's sanctity, while her misty eyes pleaded for mercy that warred with the justice I sought, transforming this moment into a profound dilemma where confiding in her might have lightened my solitary burden and potentially forged a bridge toward reconciliation, but instead I offered only vague assurances of restraint, pocketing her concern as another thread in the web of shifting loyalties that made the path forward feel increasingly labyrinthine and morally ambiguous, prompting me to question whether my insistence on solo orchestration stemmed from strength or a stubborn refusal to share the load that prolonged the emotional toll on everyone entangled in this familial knot. With the procession line forming and the organist warming up in the distance, I took my place ahead of the bridal party, flowers in hand, feeling the collective gaze of the assembly as Dad extended his arm to escort Lisa down the aisle, his posture radiating paternal pride laced with an undercurrent of apprehension that mirrored my own internal storm. Yet, as the vows commenced under the vaulted ceilings adorned with twinkling lights, I seized a brief intermission to approach him, discreetly pressing the unmarked envelope into his palm with a whispered insistence that he review its contents immediately before the moment solidified into irrevocability, watching as his fingers fumbled with the seal, his expression morphing from confusion to dawning horror amid the sacred hush of the sanctuary where the first peals of the ceremony's music swelled, leaving the air charged with the precipice of upheaval as Lisa turned inquisitively and the gathered witnesses held their breath, unaware that the real unraveling was unfolding not in vows, but in the fragile paper that threatened to upend the entire foundation of our shared history. In the hushed sanctity of the church sanctuary, where sunlight filtered through stained glass windows casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the assembled guests and the floral archway framing the altar, the minister's solemn intonation about eternal bonds and unwavering commitments continued unabated, yet everything seemed to pause in suspended animation as Dad's fingers worked feverishly at the envelope's seal, his initial confusion giving way to a cascade of expressions ranging from disbelief to outright pallor when the first document fluttered open, revealing my Stanford diploma with its embossed seal proclaiming summa cum laude honors earned through nights of relentless study and days of unyielding determination that had propelled me to the pinnacle of my class 6 months prior achievement he had dismissed as improbable during our sporadic phone check-ins followed swiftly by the crisp pages of my employment contract outlining the six-figure salary and comprehensive benefits package. From a leading Silicon Valley firm that positioned me not as the perpetual student reliant on his whims, but as a self-sufficient professional charting her own destiny far removed from the financial strings he believed he still commanded, culminating in the meticulously compiled evidence of the trust fund diversions, including bank statements and correspondence that chronicled every unauthorized transfer he had authorized in Lisa's favor, from her tuition payments to the wedding's opulent financing. All justified in his notes as safeguards for her stability, yet exposing the raw inequity that had left me to forge ahead on scholarships and grit alone, a revelation that caused the papers to tremble in his grasp, nearly slipping from his hand entirely onto the polished wooden pew amid the soft murmurs of the congregation who sensed the disruption without comprehending its seismic implications, leaving me to study the documents myself with a composed grip that belied the whirlwind of vindication and sorrow churning within as Lisa's head turned sharply from her position at the altar, her veil quivering with unspoken questions, while Mark placed a supportive hand on her shoulder, his lawyerly instincts no doubt alerting him to the legal undercurrents now surfacing in what should have been a moment of unadulterated joy. Dad's voice emerged in a hoarse whisper, barely audible over the organ's swelling prelude, as he stammered my name in a tone laced with shock and dawning realization, pulling me into a shadowed alcove behind the pulpit where the minister cast a concerned glance, but wisely pressed on with the proceedings to maintain the ceremony's fragile momentum, allowing us this stolen interlude for confrontation, as he demanded to know how and when these developments had transpired, his eyes darting between the pages that laid bare not only my triumphs, but the architecture of his deceptions, admitting in fragmented confessions that the trust manipulations began after Lisa's early college setbacks, when her dreams of art school faltered under financial pressures, prompting him to redirect funds in secret to prevent her from crumbling under the same grief that had shadowed our family since Mom's passing, a paternal instinct twisted into favoritism that he rationalized as protection, yet now confronted the cost of his choices in the form of my orchestrated exposure, which I met with a soft, ironic laugh, remarking that he had not played me at all, but rather ensnared himself in a web of assumptions about my dependence, declaring the envelope as my formal severance from the familial games that had defined our interactions for too long, a declaration infused with the witty finality of revenge that cut deep without descending into outright cruelty, yet as Aunt Karen materialized from the pews, her earlier hallway plea now transformed into a tearful intervention, beseeching me to consider Lisa's innocence in the broader scheme, her voice cracking with the weight of years spent witnessing the imbalances she had been powerless to correct, a plea that humanized the fallout, introducing a layer of complexity where Lisa's subsequent outburst from the front, overhearing fragments of our exchange, denied any foreknowledge of the fund's origins, insisting through sobs that she had always assumed Dad's generosity stemmed from his own savings rather than our shared inheritance, a claim that rang with partial truth or calculated deflection, blurring the lines between victim and beneficiary in a way that forced me to confront the moral ambiguity of my prolonged secrecy, which had amplified the drama to theatrical proportions, potentially inflicting more pain than necessary on a sister whose privileges I now saw as both envied and burdensome. The ceremony lurched forward unevenly, with vows exchanged amid a haze of whispers and sidelong glances, the minister's adaptability keeping the event afloat as rings slid into place and the pronouncement of marriage echoed through the space, yet the atmosphere remained irrevocably altered, charged with the residue of truths unearthed too late for easy reconciliation. As Dad returned the envelope to me, his posture slumped in defeat, murmuring a question about what lay ahead in this newly fractured dynamic, to which I responded with a measured shrug that the future hinged on his willingness to make amends, a non-committal stance that left room for hope or finality, depending on the paths chosen, while guests filtered into the reception hall, their congratulations tinged with curiosity about the visible tension rippling through our group, prompting superficial toasts that skirted the undercurrents as Lisa pulled me aside during the receiving line, her makeup streaked, but her gaze steady, pleading for Understanding that bridged our divide, yet revealing in her admissions a deeper entanglement where Mark's career ambitions had quietly influenced some of the financial decisions, adding a twist of external complicity that complicated the narrative of simple sibling rivalry into a tapestry of interdependent choices, none entirely blameless. As the dance floor beckoned with lively tunes and clinking glasses, I lingered on the periphery, observing Dad's interactions with relatives, his forced smiles masking the introspection sparked by the envelope's contents, wondering if this public reckoning would catalyze genuine change or merely paper over the cracks with familial obligation, while the ambiguity of our bonds persisted like an open question hanging in the air. Had my pursuit of clever justice liberated us all from outdated roles, or merely erected new barriers to the messy authenticity that true family demanded, leaving me to step into the evening's festivities alone with the envelope tucked away as a symbol of buried secrets now exhumed, yet the ultimate resolution eluding capture in the haze of what-ifs that promised to echo long after the last notes faded, ensuring that the cost of revenge remained a poignant enigma open to endless interpretation.